Let us discuss today the concept of your racial discrimination that we have to read. স্ক্রিনটা ভিজিবল হচ্ছে তো?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
ঠিক, তাহলে racial discriminationটা, let us begin with this topic, racial discrimination. We have already started the concept of your equality, and under that equality we have to read the 4 things, actually religious and racial discriminations, gender-based discrimination, and protective discrimination under various laws. The first things that we need to talk about is the racial discriminations. See, if we go to the introduction, then we can find out. We have started recording. Everything has been started. Recording, camera. So some people in the society, they are given more privileges and advantages, where others, they have been made to live in the conditions of poverty, violence, and the pressing circumstances. So that is the actual fact in any kinds of given society. If you go to any society, you can find out that people are there who are having more privileges and advantages, and others also are there living in the same society, but they have to face the conditions of poverty, violence, as well as other circumstances which can cause or hamper their easy way of spending the life. So more conspicuous is the negative treatment that has been meted out to certain individuals or the social groups or the cultural communities on the basis of their physical determinants like skin color, gender, age, linguistic or ethnic identity, caste, class, or other characteristics. So these are also happening because, as we have already said, that we are living in a society where people are there from different community, different type of religion. They are coming from different places also, but more and more problem will come when one negative treatment has been given to certain individuals or to certain groups or certain cultural communities on the basis of their physical determinants like their skin color or their gender or their age, or it may be on the basis of your linguistic or ethnic identity, or it may be the caste or the class or any other characteristics. So different society, if we go, we will find that this type of discriminations are being made. If you go to the Western society, you can find out that they are discriminating on the basis of your religion or linguistic. If you go to the Eastern type of society, like in case of our society, we are facing that caste discriminations are there, still prevalent in India also. So the negative treatment that are being provided to certain individuals or to sections in the society, vis-a-vis favors and benefits that has been provided to others is referred to as discriminations. Okay, so when we are talking about discrimination, that means one kind of negative treatment that has been provided to certain individuals or to sections of the society who are being given certain favors and the benefits than that of not of the others. So in that way, discriminations are being happening in any society. So the term discriminations, it may, however, be used in the senses of selective favor done to particular groups. Okay, so that is the way we are using the term discriminations, when certain favorisms or not favorism in a negative term is being given to a certain particular group of a society. So the issue of discrimination, it is an important one because it affects a large sections of individuals in the society and governs social relationship also, and it has a deep implications for the working of major social institutions as well. So that is the reasons we need to start study that concept of racial discrimination, because this issue of discrimination, it will have a effect on the large sections of the individuals in the society, or it has implications for their working of your major social implications as in institutions as well. So that is our introduction part, whatever we have talked about in case of racial discriminations. Now, if we go to the concept of discrimination, you can find out that people in any society, they are being divided into categories on the basis of their caste, age, gender, wealth, or it may be other criteria as well. So the division of people into distinct categories that are being referred to as stratification. Yeah, so this division of people into different type of categories, we can term this as stratification. We are using that term in our research work also. So it is a difference between the categories, which is important because it sets out one category apart from the another category. Now, when one category is treated as superior than the other, we say that inequality has come into existence. So that is the concept, that is the question of discrimination will come when one category, they are being treated as superior than that of the other category. And in that case, we can say that inequality has also already come into being. So discrimination, it refers to the kind of unequal treatment of individuals, social or ethnic groups. So that is the main concept of your discriminations. When we are talking about discrimination, that means unequal treatment has been given to certain individuals or to certain groups or to certain social or ethnic groups it may be. So if we examine the concept of discrimination closely, we can realize that um, the often inequality, it leads to discrimination, and discrimination perpetuates inequality. Okay. So this is the most important term that we need to know, because we have to realize that this inequality, it will lead to discrimination, and when a discrimination is there, then it perpetuates inequality. So the most common forms of discriminations found in the society, particularly in India, are like caste-based, race-based, class-based, gender-based, ethnicity-based, or income-based. So different society, they have their own type of discriminations. If we go to India, we will find that in case of India, we have this type of discriminations. It may be the related to the caste, it may be related to the race-based discriminations also, it can be class-based discriminations also. Sometimes gender-based discriminations are also being found in our Indian society, and sometimes it may be ethnicity-based or income-based discriminations also are happening in our society. So in addition to these discriminations can be based on your health or the well-being of an individual as well. We know that physically and mentally challenged people, as also those suffering from communicable diseases, are discriminated against. So this discrimination, it has a wider amplitude, because you cannot concentrate it within certain limited area. Discriminations, when there is in the society, it may be related to anything. So in any kinds of given society, different things are being there. On the basis of that, uh, discriminations are being found. So that when we are talking about the concept of discrimination, it generally means that unequal treatments, whatever has been happened to, it may be to the individuals, it may be to the groups, or it may be to certain, either it may be social groups or it may be the ethnic groups as well. So in that way, we can understand the concept of discriminations, superior and inferior, targeting a certain group of people, individual people, uh, on the basis of either it may be the caste, class, religion, race, it may be on other grounds also. Okay. So that is so the entire concept of discrimination, whatever we can talk in this lecture. Now, if we go to the definition of discrimination, we can say that racial discriminations, whatever we are discussing in today's lectures, it refers to unequal treatment of persons or group on the basis of their race or ethnicity. So that is the concept of your racial discriminations. I will come later on also with this total concept of racial discrimination. But at first, while defining the discrimination, at first we need to know that when we are talking about racial discrimination, that means it has been some kinds of unequal treatment what happened to persons or the group on the basis of either their race or their ethnicity. So in defining racial discriminations, the scholars or the legal advocates, they have distinguished between differential treatment and disparate impact, creating two-part definitions. Okay, so that is the scholars, they have defined the concept of discrimination. It will be defining two parts. So differential treatment occurs when individuals are treated unequally because of their race. That is the first part, because if differential treatment, it occurs when certain individuals are there who are being treated unequally because of their race. And in another way, we can say that a disparate impact occurs when individuals are treated equally according to a given set of rules, but when the latter are constructed in ways that favors members of one group over the another. Okay, so this is the two different things. That is the reason the scholars they have identified. In first case, what we have found that differential treatment it occurs to the individuals or to the group of the people on the basis of their race. In second case, we found that individuals they are being treated equally, but what happens according to certain set of rules, the latter they are being constructed in ways that favors members of one group over the another. So here also, when we are favoring one group over the another, that means unequal treatment is being happened, and that is the reason discrimination has occurred. So these are the two ways that the scholars they are trying to give a definition of discrimination. So now, the second component of the definition, it broadens its scope to include decisions and the processes that may not themselves have any explicit racial content, but that have the consequence of producing or reinforcing racial disadvantages. So beyond more conventional forms of individual discriminations, processes such as these are important in assessing how valued opportunities are structured by race. So a key feature of any definition of discrimination is its focus on behavior, how the society behaves with certain individuals or the group of people. So the focus is on the behavior. So discrimination is distinct from a racial prejudice that is related to your attitudes. It may be different from your racial stereotypes, like what are the beliefs are there in the society. Even it different from the concept of racism, that is ideologies. So that may also be associated with racial disadvantages. So discrimination, it may be motivated either by prejudice or stereotypes or racisms. But the definition of discrimination, it doesn't presume any unique underlying cause. Okay. So that is the way we can try to give a definition of discriminations. Now, if we are talking about the forms of discrimination, you can find out that in most situations, it is possible to identify discriminatory practices and say that discrimination is taking place, but it is not easy to identify the precise reasons for it. Okay, we can say in any given society, we can say that discriminations are taking place, but it is very difficult to identify the reasons for the discrimination. So why these things happens? Because we often see discrimination against women in society. Now, while discriminations may be based to be meted to the women because of their gender, there is a possibility that discrimination against a particular woman is compounded because of her low caste and poor economic conditions also. So we know that discriminations have happened in certain societies. We don't. It may be there that certain discriminations are being there against the women in the society. So that is on the basis of gender that discrimination is taking place. But if we talk about the gender discriminations, it can also happen that because of a low caste or poor economic conditions, also discriminations are being going ahead. So really, it is quite difficult that on what basis the discrimination is being there. Either it is on the basis of the gender or it on the basis of your her caste, low caste, or it may be the poor economic conditions. So in such a way, it is we know that the discriminations are being happening, but definitely it is quite impossible that we can find out the reasons for its existence. So in such a situations, it becomes difficult to identify the reasons for discriminations. But if we look for the entire things, the discrimination, it can be categorized in three ways. One is your social discriminations, another one is your economic discrimination, and the third one is your gender-based discriminations. When we are talking about social discriminations, it may happen on the basis of the caste, class, race, or religion. When we are talking about the gender discrimination, it may be different. Economic discriminations, it may be on the basis of the rich and the poor, wealthy and the unwealthy, haves and have not. If we talk about the gender-based discrimination, it may on the basis of your male and female, what are the opportunities, what are the favorism that are being given to them in a particular society. So these are the three entire area on the basis of that we can say that these are the forms of discriminations. But really it is quite difficult to identify that what are the reasons for these discriminations. Discriminations may happen in the society, but identifying the reasons for those discriminations is quite difficult. As I have already said, that if discrimination is being given to a particular class of women, then it may be on the basis of gender that the discrimination is taking place. It may be also on the low caste of the women that the discriminations are being taking place, or it may be on the low income of those women that the discriminations have been taken place. But generally it is the three categories on the basis of which discriminations can happen. So forms of discriminations, there are three: social discriminations, economic discriminations, and the gender-based discriminations. Okay, so I think up to that much is everything is okay. Is it okay up to that much?
Yes, sir.
So let me go to the next one. Where? The next one is your concept of race. Okay, so as our discussion is on racial discriminations, at first we have identified what is discriminations, what are the definition of discrimination, what are the forms of discrimination. Now we need to know about the concept of race. So the word race, it has been variously traced to the Latin, like ratio, what means is your reasons, or radix, what means that a root, or to the Hebrew for head or origin. So that is the, that means origination of the words race. So it may came into being with the like Latin word ratio, what means your reasons, or it may be the radix, that means a root, or the Hebrew for head or origin. So in the first edition of your Oxford English Dictionary, definition of a race, it describes the term as a group of several tribes or the peoples forming a distinct ethnic stock and one of the great divisions of mankind having certain peculiarities in common. So that is the definition. It has been given in Oxford English Dictionary in their first edition. Before that, we don't have the no one has given definition of race. If we go to the legal definitions also, the legal scholars, they have not defined the concept of race. Rather, they are talking about the problems with the race. So if really we want to know the definition or the concept of race, we need to know from the biologist or the anthropologist, not from the legal scholars, because I will later on say that in case of legal scholars, they have tried to evade to define the concept of race. Rather, they are highlighting on the problems of a race or the racial discrimination. So all races that are currently classified by the anthropologist or the biologist as belonging to one species, that is Homo sapiens, and all races, they share almost 99.99% of the same genetic materials, which means that divisions of race, that is largely subjective in nature. Okay, so we can make a distinction on the basis of race, or the discriminations can be there. But if we really want to go to the definition, whatever has been given by the anthropologist or the biologist, we can find out that they have tried to classify this concept of your race only on the basis of one species, that is Homo sapiens. We are all Homo sapiens, and whatever the races that are existence in our all the society, they shares almost 99.99% of same type of genetic materials. Okay. So through by that we can understand that this concept of race, it is really a subjective in nature. Because by force they are trying to make a distinction on the basis of race, but generally all we are sharing almost 99.99% of same type of genetic materials, and we are all belonging to the Homo sapiens. If we go to the classification of race, we can find out that this anthropologist or the biologist, they usually try to divide human beings into races like one is your Caucasoid, Negroid, Mongoloid, and Australoid. Okay, that the four categories they have divided. This definition, it is usually on the basis of origin and the variations that are being found among these peoples. So if we go to the Caucasoid, they are the inhabitants of Europe, America, the white Americans, Australia, the white Australians, because they have black Australians also, New Zealand, also the white New Zealands, and South Africa, that also the white peoples, West Asia, South Asia, and the parts of your Central Asia. So these are the Caucasoid, they are the inhabitants of those areas. If we go to the Negroids, that is called Negroes, so they are being divided into African Negroids and Oceanic Negroids, and they are really the inhabitants of Africa, America, New Guinea, and the neighboring islands of the Guinea, Andaman Island, Malay Peninsula, your East Sumatra, and your Philippine Islands. So in those areas you can find the Negroids. If we go to the Mongoloids, they are really the inhabitants of your China, Mongolia, Tibet, Siberia, North America, Greenland, Burma, Thailand, then your Philippines, Japan, and in case of us, the Northeast India. And if we go to the Australoid, that include the two main groups. One is your Australian Aborigines and the pre-Dravidian or Austroid or Vedoid. So they are the inhabitants of Australia, then your Philippines, Malay Peninsula, Andaman Island, South and Central India. So these are the four categories of race that are being classified by the anthropologist or the biologist, and this division, it is being made on the basis of their origin and the variations that are being found among them. Okay. And it is all this race that are being divided on the basis of their settlement, where they are being settled. So that classification of race, it has been done by the biologist or the anthropologist. So is there any problem?
No, sir.
So we have already classified the race. Now let us understand the concept of your racial discrimination. So discriminations, it has been the idea of discrimination, the definition of discrimination has been given, the concept of race has also been given to you. Now we have to go through the concept of your racial discrimination. So race as a concept, it has often been employed to classify human beings into different categories, whatever we have learned in our previous slides. So this categorization is normally, it is based upon either color, ethnicity, cultures, or even on the national origin also. So usually when we identify a person through any of the above mentioned ingredients, we are expected to be actually seeing him or her as part of a particular race. However, this is not as simple whatever it seems. So the whole debate around this race, it has revolved around the perceptions of superiority and inferiority in between the groups of people so classified. So that is the main things whatever is being there in case of racial discriminations. Because when we are talking about this whole debate of race, it is it is being revolved around these perceptions of your superiority and inferiority in between the people or group of people who are being classified. So just take an example that um, your white man's burden theory. So the Britishers, they ruled India with the perceptions that Indians constitute an inferior race, and it is the responsibility of white men to help them in their emancipations. Okay, so that is the reasons what we have to talk about, means we need to know while we are talking about the concept of your racial discriminations, because as we have already said, this entire debate on this race or racial discriminations, it is being revolving around the perceptions of your who are superior and who are inferior. So when we are taking the example of this white man's burdens, so the really the Britishers, they they rule India with the perception that Indians, they constitute the inferior race, and it is the responsibility of the white men who are the superior race to help them in their emancipations. So that was their feeling. I will not say a lot more in these things. So if we talk another examples, you can think about the Nazi government in Germany, or whatever that apartheid policy of South Africa. So in both the situations, the discrimination, they are being based upon the perceptions of race, that is based upon ethnicity. Okay. So in that way, this concept of racial discrimination, it has emerges. We'll definitely go into the history of racial discriminations, but when this concept it emerges in case of our society, or in case of your African society or European or American society, we found that these perceptions of superiority and inferiority, that was being there in the minds of certain category of people. So take one case that is very important case, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, that is in 1954 case. So this idea of strengthening people and giving them differential treatment that based upon the assumption that white and black, they constitute different races. So on this assumption that black and the white, they are constituting different races, varying services were provided to fulfill their different needs, even to the extent of having different schools for their children. Okay, so this idea that segregated the people in between two classes, one is white people and the black people. So that assumptions, it on the basis of these assumptions, different type of varying services that are being provided in order to fulfill their different type of needs, and it can be to the extent that different schools has been provided to the children who are belonging to the black skin and who are belonging to the white skin. In normal parlance, discrimination, it is based upon the perceptions of the race that constitutes racial discriminations. So the questions that really here are what constitute race and how to define it. Okay. So that in terms of biologists, in terms of anthropologists, they can give the definition, but when we are talking about the legal definition, or it may be the social definition, it is quite difficult. So the legal literature, they has tried to evade defining the concept of race, because it is not possible for the legal luminaries to define the concept of race. So many international agreements as well as the conventions that have been addressed the issue of racial discriminations, but they have not defined the term what constitute race. So if we go to the like United Nations provisions, if we go to the ICCPR, then ICACR, they have going through the provisions of racial discriminations, but they have never defined the term what constitute race or what is race. So UN conventions on elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, that is your 1965, then your UN charter 1948, or your ILO Indian International Labour Organization's discriminations on employment and occupation, that conventions, or it may be the UNESCO conventions against discriminations in education, or it may be the ICCPR International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or it may be the ICACR International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. They all have talked about the concept of racial discriminations, but they have never defined the term race. So in effect, these efforts of the international community have been more to deal with the anathema of race, what are the problem with this race, by limiting discriminations arising out of it, but without going into the debate as what constitute race. Okay, so that we have also learned from our biological and anthropologist scholars as well as from the legal luminaries, because in case of legal luminaries, it is not possible for them to give the definition of race. That is the reasons what they have tried to do, that they have tried to evade the definition of race, and they have given more and more focus on the sufferings that are being happened due to race, through by which that certain limitations of discriminations that has arisen, and they have not gone into the debate of what constitute race. Okay. Okay. Now, is there any questions or doubt till now? Do you have any questions or doubt, or everything is
রেসটা যদি
okay?
একটু আরেকবার একটু বলেন,
কিটা?
এই ডিসক্রিমিনেশন অফ দ্য রেস এটা বললেন না, ওটা আরেকবার একটু যদি রিমাইন্ডার করে দিন।
ডিসক্রিমিনেশন অফ রেস, আমি যেটা বলতে চাইলাম যে প্রথমত এই কথাটা যে ঠিক আমরা যে 4 ভাগে ভাগ করেছি, যেটা আমরা বললাম যে মঙ্গলয়েড এন্ড তারপরে তোমার আর যেটা আছে কি, যে 4টে ছিল আমি বলে দিচ্ছি একটু। এই কাউকাসয়েড, নিগ্রোয়েডস, মঙ্গলয়েডস এন্ড অস্ট্রোলয়েড। সো এই 4টে ভাগে যে ভাগ করা হয়েছে, এগুলো ভাগ করা হয়েছে বাই দ্য অ্যানথ্রোপোলজিস্ট অর দ্য বায়োলজিস্ট। কিন্তু অ্যানথ্রোপোলজিস্ট এবং বায়োলজিস্ট যারা আছে তারাও বলেছে যে এই যে মানে ভাগ, যে বিভিন্ন রেসের ভাগ, এটা কিন্তু মানে কোনোটাই সেরকম ভাবে যথাযোগ্য নয়, কারণ 99.99% they have been classified as Homo sapiens. We are all belonging to the Homo sapiens. So whatever the classification that has been done, that is subjective classification on basis of where the peoples they are staying. So কোনো কোনো অঞ্চলে কিছু কিছু লোক থাকে এবং তাদের আকার প্রকৃতি, তাদের চেহারার গঠন, সেই অনুযায়ী তাদেরকে ভাগ করা হয়েছে। তো এটা হচ্ছে যদি সত্যি সত্যি বলা হয় যে what constitute race, or what is the definition of race, and what are the categories of race. But we have to remember this, because on the basis of your biologist and anthropologist, তারা এরকম ভাবে সেপারেট করেছে। কিন্তু আমরা যখন দেখবো যে লিগ্যাল স্কলার্স বা লিগ্যাল লুমিনারিজ, তারা কিন্তু রেসের কনসেপ্ট বা ডেফিনেশন দেওয়ার থেকে রেসের যে প্রবলেমটা সেটাতে বেশি আইডেন্টিফাই করেছে, কারণ তারা ইভেট করেছে যে নো নিড টু give the definition of race, rather let's us give focus on what are the problems that has been happened due to this racial discrimination. So আমরা যদি বিভিন্ন ইন্টারন্যাশনাল ইনস্ট্রুমেন্টসে যাই, তো সেই ইনস্ট্রুমেন্টগুলো যেটা আমরা একটা দুটো অবশ্যই পড়বো, সেখানে আমরা দেখতে পাবো যে কোনো ইনস্ট্রুমেন্টই রেসের ডেফিনেশন দেয়নি, rather they have talked about that what are the problems that has been arising due to the racial discriminations. ঠিক আছে, তো এইটা আমি এতক্ষণ যেটা বলতে চাইলাম, what does it means by race and discriminations.
ওকে স্যার।
হ্যাঁ, তাহলে আমরা এবার নেক্সটটা শুরু করি। Next হচ্ছে the history of racial discrimination. So from that area we are now talking about entirely on the legal fields. So if we go to the history of racial discrimination, it is quite old in nature. There have been times when race was recognized and accorded legal protection in a lot more countries. So the most pronounced instances of racial discrimination in the present past that came from Germany, South Africa, and Southern Rhodesia. So these are the three situations where we will talk about the history of racial discrimination. What happened in South Africa, what happened in Germany, and what happened in Southern Rhodesia. And all these provisions will be discussed only on the basis of your legal terms, not on other terms. Okay, so let us begin this history of racial discrimination. What happened in Germany? We know that in case of Germany, there is a lot more problem regarding these Jews and like what the Hitler he has done. So this anti-Semitism, what is that hatred of Jews, was at its peak was under the Nazi regime of Germany. So when Nazi regime was there under the leadership of Hitler, this hatred of Jews that was there in the peak situations. So during the first 6 years of this Hitler's dictatorship, that is your from 1933 to 1939. Okay. So in that period, hundreds of regulations were being passed to restrict all aspects of public as well as the private lives of Jews in Germany. So from that period, we can understand this hatred of Jews has happened in case of Germany. During this dictatorship of your Hitler, he has passed a number of regulations, more than 100 regulations, which restricted both the public as well as the private lives of the people of Jew category who are living in Germany. So if we talk about the first major legislations in this regard was the law for the restorations of the professional civil service 1933. And this law, it excluded Jews and other politically unreliable civil servants and employees from state services. Okay, so from that you can understand that how this problem of racial discrimination it took place in Jews, where in Germany, where they have framed the law through by which they have excluded the Jews people or some other politically unreliable people who can work as civil servants or employees under the state services. Next on, restrictions has also been imposed on a number of Jew students in German schools and universities. So that has also happened. Jew students, they have been restricted to enroll as a student in German schools as well as in universities. So the certain Jew students, they have been restricted. In 1935, Nuremberg laws were being passed to exclude German Jews from your rich citizenships, and it prohibited them from marrying with the persons of German or German-related blood. That type of law has also been made in Germany during 1935, which actually prohibited the people of Germany to marry the persons who are the persons of your Germans or German related blood. So this type of discriminations has happened in Germany during the period of 1933 to 1939 was at its peak during the Hitler's dictatorship. And we have also found that a number of laws has been made which try to make some kinds of discriminations in between the Jew peoples and the other peoples. It may be related to your services under the state. It may be related to in case of your educational institutions like universities and schools and colleges, and it may be also related to the in case of your marrying people who are related to German or German blood. So that happened in Germany. If we go to the Southern Rhodesia, we can find out that in Southern Rhodesia, although there was no such general law, they have not made any general law which can classify the population on the basis of race, whatever happened in case of South Africa, that we will also learn. There were a number of legislations which discriminated in between different racial groups. So in Southern Rhodesia also, they have not made any general law regarding this racial discrimination, but they have a number of legislations which try to discriminate in between different racial groups. So if we look at the Master and Servant Act 1901, it provided that Africans, they could only go to the towns to labor for the white people and had to return back to their villages after or whatever the works has been done on behalf of the white peoples. So these type of law are being made in case of your Southern Rhodesia, which really means trying to make a racial discrimination, through by which it tries to say that those Africans, they can go only to the towns for the purpose of giving labor to the white people, and after fulfillment of those work to give labor to the white people, they have to return back to their own villages. If we go to another act, that is your Land Apportionment Act 1943, what happened in case of Southern Rhodesia, this act, it provided that half of the land was to be reserved for use by the white people, and these white peoples, it really constituted less than 10% of the population, at about 5 to 6% of the populations. Now, these type of laws are also being made in Southern Rhodesia through by this Land Apportionment Act. They provided that half of the land, um, it should be reserved for the people. It should be reserved for the white people, and these white peoples, it constituted at about 5 to 6% of the total populations. So that type of discriminations are being made in Southern Rhodesia. You can find out that also they have done this through by making laws. If we go to another law in case of your Southern Rhodesia, that is your the Africans Urban Areas Accommodation and Registration Act 1946, as well as the Native Registration and Identification Act 1957. These two laws, they provided for discriminations against the non-European groups of people. Okay. So this way, the Southern Rhodesia, they have also made different laws in order to um, make these provisions of racial discriminations more and more vibrant, and through by this discriminations on the basis of race that are being made in Southern Rhodesia. Now, if we go to the South Africa, in South Africa, this racial policy of apartheid, whatever we have learned, apartheid, that is actually the system of institutionalized the racial segregation that was existed in South Africa from 1948 to 1990. So this apartheid, that is the segregation of your racial discriminations, that has been institutionalized. So this apartheid policy was applied by the government during 1950s and 60s in South Africa. Different laws, a number of laws were being passed which have given preferential treatment to a particular sections of the populations, that is the white people. So if we talk about one legislation, that is the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act 1949, this Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act 1949, it actually banned all marriages in between Europeans and non-Europeans. While if we talk about the Immorality Act 1950, it prohibits sexual relations in between persons of different races. So this type of laws are also being made in South Africa, where they have banned that marriages in between European and non-European peoples, and also they have prohibited that sexual relations in between persons of different races. So other laws, whatever has been done in South Africa, that is the Group Areas Act and the Reservation of Separate Amenities Act 1953. These two laws, they have prevented members of different races from attending entertainments, cultural events, or even going to the restaurants together. Okay. So those type of laws are also being made in South Africa, and that also on the basis of race. So I am highlighting on these three countries. I will not highlight India, because in case of India, we have not that much of racial discriminations, but more than that of your casteism, caste or class discriminations have been happened. So here, as we are talking about the racial discriminations, I will not highlight the provisions whatever happened in India. So from these three states, you can identify that how this concept of racial discriminations has been legalized in different countries that can also be being classified as the developing countries, or sometimes it may be the developed countries also. And all these things they have passed by law, through by the proper governmental law. It is not only that what actually it happens within the society, rather it is being approved by the government authorities. So this is the limited area of your history of racial discrimination, what happened in these three nations. So up to that much, I think it's okay also, because we have not talked about more critical terms. So the history of racial discrimination is okay. Is it okay? What happens? So is it okay up to that much? Or is there any query or any doubt or anything you need to ask? We have already talked about up to that history of racial discriminations. We have highlighted the three countries, Germany, South Africa, and Southern Rhodesia. So if it is okay, then I will move forward. What happens? Are you listening to me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. See, after the history of racial discriminations, now we have to talk about the racial discriminations and what happened in case of UN or United Nations. So we know that after 1945, United Nations came into being, and with these provisions of United Nations, they have also tried to highlight the situations what happened in case of racial discriminations. So let us try to understand what the United Nations they have done with regard to the problem of racial discrimination. So within Commonwealth and as also at the United Nations, this discrimination that was being first noted in connection with the Indians living in the South Africa. Okay, so that is the first, that is the area where the United Nations as well as the Commonwealth they have given focus. They have given focus with regard to the problems that has happened to the Indians who are living in South Africa. As we already have heard that apartheid, it was being inscribed on the agenda of the General Assembly in its very first session. So the General Assembly they have adopted on 19th December 1968 one resolutions on the measures to achieve the rapid and total elimination of all forms of discrimination in general and of the policy of apartheid in particular. So after United Nations came into being, it is in the 1968 that also at the last moment of the at the last of 1968, that is 19th December, this General Assembly of the United Nations they have adopted one resolution, and that resolutions it talks about on the measures that need to be achieved. to go for total elimination as well as rapid elimination of all forms of discriminations in general, and of the policy of apartheid in particular. So it is only when the countries they freed from the bonds of the colonialism, they joined the United Nations, that the world recognized the need for legislations in the area of racial discriminations. Okay, so the countries they whoever got their independence from the bonds of your colonialism, because from 1945 onwards a number of countries they got their independence, and before the independence they were the colonial country under either it may be under the British or maybe in the France or maybe other countries also. So they joined the United Nations, and that they have the world they also recognize the need for the legislations in the area of your racial discrimination, and that is the reasons Article 1 clause 3, 13, Article 13 clause 1, Article 55 clause C, 56 and 76 clause C of your United Nations charters, they embody the principle of non-discriminations on the grounds of race. So that is the first time the worlds they have taken the view that this racial discrimination it should be eliminated totally and rapidly as it is possible. So other than these provisions, we have other provisions also like Article 2, Clause 7 and Chapter 7 of your charter, UN Charter, which relate to the racism and threat to peace. So in that way, the United Nations they were trying to achieve this eradication or the elimination of racial discriminations, and that also with the goal that it should be eliminated as quickly as possible and it should be eliminated in a total manner. So that is the reasons in the United Nations Charter, UN Charter, we have different provisions which talks about the principle of non-discriminations on the grounds of race. Okay. So through by that you can find out that how much importance they have given, the United Nations they have given on the area of elimination of racial discrimination. If we talk about the other international and regional instruments, the major international instruments which deals with the discriminations and equality, they are International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and then International Conventions on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discriminations, Conventions on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, then Conventions on the Rights of the Child. So these are the major international instruments which deals with the discriminations and the provisions of equality. Other than that, in addition to those conventions also, there are certain regional treaties which discourages discriminations and promote equality. And those international instruments are regional instruments. Regional treaties are like African Charter on Human and People's Rights, then European Social Charter of 1961, and it has been revised in 1996 as well. Then we have the European Union Charter on Fundamental Rights and American Conventions on Human Rights, and as also European Convention on Human Rights. So these are the areas, these are the international instruments as well as the regional treaties that have highlighted the provisions of your racial discriminations, so that these racial discriminations that needs to be eradicated as early as possible from the entire world. So that is the reasons, and it's not only the United Nations, other international instruments, they have also highlighted the problem of the racial discrimination. And it is not only the United Nations and the international instruments, the regional treaties, they have also highlighted the provisions of racial discrimination, so that it should be eliminated as early as possible, and total eradication of racial discrimination, it should happen through by the entire world. Okay. So up to that much, whatever we have talked about from very beginning till now, um, what is discrimination, the concept of discrimination, the definition of discrimination, what do you mean by race, and then we have discussed the racial discriminations, what are the history of racial discriminations, and how the United Nations as well as the other international and regional instruments, they have highlighted the provisions of racial discriminations. From now onwards, we will try to um, give our focus on the legal instruments that has been there, which talks about the racial discrimination. And in this case, we will try to highlight the provisions of your um, international conventions on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, that is CERD in 1965. So this specific instrument I will try to highlight because it was the area where the provisions of racial discrimination has been given more and more opportunity to grow, more and more an opportunity to highlight the provisions of this elimination of racial discriminations. And later on, I will try to give certain one case law, only one case law, not more than that, one case laws, what happened in International Court of Justice. And later on, we will try to come to a conclusion. So that is the entire things that we need to discuss about. So let me just talk on this issue, the legal framework of the elimination of legal discrimination. See, the most pronounced documents for limiting the effects of racial discrimination, it is the International Conventions for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, that is CERD, and it has happened in 1965. So this convention, it tends to treat the ideas or theories of superiority of one race or group of persons of one color or ethnic origin as the main source or cause of racial discriminations. Okay, so it was this convention, it was trying to treat what are the ideas are there or the theories are there regarding the superiority of one race over the others, and that also it was the main source or the cause of racial discrimination. As we have already highlighted, this problem of your superiority and inferiority, that is the main things which highlighted the provisions of racial discrimination. So it defines the racial discrimination in Article 1, Clause 1, like the term racial discrimination, it shall mean any distinction, exclusion, restrictions, or preference based on race, color, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal footing of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, or any other field of public life. Okay, so in that way, they are trying to given the definition of racial discrimination, as we have already highlighted that it is not the legal scholars who are trying to give the definition of racial discrimination. Rather, they try to evade to go to the definition of race, and thereby they are trying to more and more given focus on what constitute racial discriminations and what are the problems related to the racial discrimination. This definition of race they have tried to evade. So this convention CRD, it doesn't make an doesn't make an express reference to anti-Semitism, so nor does it mention other forms of racism except apartheid, which is addressed in Article 3 and the preambles, because we have already highlighted that when United Nations they come out with the provisions of racial discriminations, they have given focus on what happened to the Indians by in the South Africa, and that is the reasons they have given more and more focus on the concept of your apartheid. So this conventions also in 1965, it doesn't make any kinds of express reference to the provisions of your hatred to Jews, what happens like anti-Semitism, or not does it means to other forms of racism, and they have only given focus on the concept of apartheid, and it is being addressed in Article 3 of your this convention as well as in the preamble of the conventions also. So sometimes the expressions of discrimination on ethnic grounds that are closely related with discriminations on religious grounds. So the conventions, however, doesn't address this later on issue also. So they have given more and more focus on the discrimination, what happens on the basis of your ethnic grounds, and they are trying to evade the discrimination that happens on the basis of your religious grounds. So they have not addressed the issue of religious discriminations, and they have given focus on ethnic uh, racial discrimination on ethnic grounds. This few later on sections that we can discuss later on in our next provisions of the chapters. I have only some other things to mention in legal framework of national elimination of discriminations regarding this concept of your CERD. Okay. International Conventions on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, 1965. So for today's first two lectures, up to that much only, whatever we have discussed, and the last few provisions related to your conventions on elimination of discrimination that I will highlight in our next class, which will happen from 2:50 onwards for today. So for first two class, that is maximum whatever we have discussed. So in today's class, really we have started with a lot many things regarding this racial discrimination. So we have highlighted that introductions. Then we have tried to give the concept of discriminations. What do you mean by the provisions of discriminations? Then we have tried to give definition of discriminations also. And then what are the forms of discrimination that has also been highlighted. And later on, we have talked about the concept of race, classification of race also we have dealt with. And we have also tried to understand the racial discrimination, the provisions of racial discriminations. Then we have also discussed about the history of racial discriminations. And when we are talking about history of racial discrimination, we have highlighted the racial discrimination that took place in Germany, that took place in Southern Rhodesia, as well as in South Africa. After that, we have also discussed about the racial discriminations and the United Nations provisions. So what the UN Charter they have provided, that also we have mentioned. And later on, we also have highlighted what are the other international and regional instruments are there, which talk about the provisions of the racial discriminations. And later on, we have started the provisions of your legal framework for the elimination of racial discrimination. And here we have highlighted the provisions of international conventions for the elimination of all forms of racial discriminations, that is CERD, what happens in 1965. The next part, it will be dealt on in our next class. Okay, so let us now, if any discussions or any questions or any queries is there, that we will try to highlight in this class. So is there anything from your side?